All right, so now it's time for actually a pretty exciting part of the project. I am officially at absolute zero, so not just pretend anymore. The Jeep is entirely stripped down, nuts and bolts, everything's in boxes and bags, and I'm looking at new parts. And so this has actually been something that I've been working at the whole time, and just kind of keeping a register of what I need. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how that went. So I haven't talked about it yet on the videos, even though it's kind of been going on in the background. So first of all, as I was taking the vehicle apart, you may have noticed I always take every single bolt out, every single part. I label it, I bag it if it'll fit into a bag, and then I put it into a Tupperware bin that's also labeled. So engine, chassis, interior, and so on. And when I do that, I will take a look at each part and decide whether or not that part is suitable to go back in or not. And so, like, for an example, here I got a gas pedal. This has actually been sandblasted, which I'll talk about in a minute. But this is a part that's perfectly fine to go back in. So I would save this. Other parts were a lot worse shape. And some parts just aren't reusable. But I ended up creating a list of about 75 or 80 new parts. And so where did I get all those parts? Well, Quadratech was a great resource online. I've had ups and downs with Quadratech. I'm in Canada, of course, and that makes everything difficult. Quadratech being no exception. They have a great website. So any part you're looking for, so I'll pull off an O-ring or I'll pull off a bolt, and I can Google right away, and the first place that it comes up with is Quadratech. So I decided early on I was going to get as much stuff as I could from one vendor because it was going to save me some hassle in shipping down the road. So I got about 75 of those 80 parts from Quadratech. And, you know, in many cases they're made in China, so they're not necessarily as good as the originals, but the originals are 30 years old and they're destroyed. So most parts I did get kind of like the Onyx or the Crown equivalents, and you'll see as we start putting them back on in the future here. And so we're going to see how that works out. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to be great or if it's going to suck. With a vehicle with so many new parts, you know, some of them are going to fail. It's just a matter of percentages. So one thing I do is when I get parts for suspension, parts for engine, even reliable systems like brakes, things that are absolutely must work, I'll pay a little bit more money and get a made in North America item, or at least not made in China item. So that would apply to like the shocks, for example, or the wheel bearings would be another example, because I know those just, they don't last if you get low quality parts. So that's the good side of Quadratech. The bad side of Quadratech is the ordering and the shipping. So I actually called them up and said, you know, I'm ordering about $5,000 worth of parts. I want you to A, give me a discount, and B, arrange for them to come in as few boxes as possible. And the reason why is I decided to ship them to a storage depot in Montana. So this is kind of a thing that Canadians do with, you know, like 90% of Canadians living within 3 hours of the US border. So there's these little vendors, little depots along the border where you can ship parts. They give you a PO box and you ship there and you can go pick them up and import them yourself. So because Quadratech uses UPS, and if most people who aren't Canadian don't realize this, but UPS completely gouges us. So even though we have free trade between the two countries, what UPS does is they have to add a brokerage fee. And it's a legitimate fee because someone has to decide whether the item in question is actually eligible for free trade. Because some things that are made outside of the NAFTA zone, they don't qualify. So someone has to make that determination. And that determination is what costs you the money. Because they just make a blanket assumption that you're importing uranium, you know, and the tariffs are the absolute maximum that they can be. And they tack that on. So for example, if you buy a $200 part, they're going to put a $50 tariff on it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have to buy in US dollars, and the exchange rate is about 37% above and beyond now. So, you know, add 37% to the price you see on the website. So you already paid 25% to UPS. You've now paid 37% on the dollar, and that still hasn't even got you the shipping to get it into Canada, which is always more because it's a further distance. So you add all that up, and you almost pay double for a part. And so that's just what Canadians deal with. So if I can go to the US and import it myself, number one, I can get rid of all those brokerage clearing fees, and I only have to pay the 37% on the dollar. And obviously it cost me some money to drive down there and get it. But other than that, the shipping to Montana is free because everything ships all over the US for free from Quadratech. So I decided I was going to do that. But right off the bat, things went haywire. Quadratech, they only charge you when they ship something. And they could not coordinate what they were putting in what box, what was being shipped. So I ended up with about 23 different discrete credit card charges, totaling somewhere near the amount that I thought I was supposed to spend. They also supplied me with about 18 or 19 tracking numbers. So trying to reconcile the things that I ordered, the price that I actually paid for the things that I ordered, whether or not those items shipped, what tracking number that they were shipped on, took me hours and actually days. And at that point, Quadratech just quit taking my calls. I would leave messages. Items were not necessarily being shipped when they were supposed to be being shipped. So it was really the customer service at Quadratech was appalling. It's really depressing when you make the biggest order the guy's ever seen and he doesn't even call you back or email you back for a week. So in the end, that ended up delaying my trip to Montana while I coordinated all the parts. Turned out some of them were back ordered, and thankfully I got a new rep at Quadratech who actually was able to ship those directly to Canada, and those weren't really instrumental in the early parts of the build, so that worked out okay. So I made my trip down to Montana one day. It was a nice day in early February, and border crossing is pretty easy. You just say you're going to pick up some parts. I shipped them to a place called Montana Shipping Outlet, and I got to give props to them. They were the only part of this that wasn't painful. They had everything there. They had a computer tracking system. They pulled all of the boxes. I think there were 28 of them in total. I got emails when each of the boxes arrived, so I knew they were already there and waiting for me. I knew how heavy all the boxes were, and so I knew how to fit them into my truck. So loaded up the truck, brought it back to Canada and back home. So once I had everything home, then I went into actually unloading of the truck, and I'll show you the video of that here. So with Jack's help, we were able to pull everything out and check them. So I had to ensure, since I ordered these all from the US, that all the parts were in the boxes, that the parts weren't broken, at least looked reasonably decent. Because if I was going to return them, I didn't want to wait 6 months until I may install the part. So I went through each part one by one, verified it against my impossible to understand invoices and credit card statements, just to verify that I got all the things that I thought I got. And amazingly, I'll give it to Quadratech, they actually shipped everything they said they shipped. Everything showed up in a shape that I would consider good. And two things were back ordered that they didn't declare to me, but I figured out by doing this process, and they were both for the tops of the Jeep, which I'm not going to need for quite some time. But there's a lot of stuff here, and Jack and I had a field day kind of unpacking it all and disposing of the cardboard boxes when we were done. So I have to say, even though the process was painful, I saved probably $4,000 or $5,000. So it actually made sense to drive down the border and get this stuff. So thanks to everybody who kind of helped me along the way. It's much appreciated. And after the fact, this is my basement. So I have a whole new Jeep in the basement and a whole old Jeep in the garage. So now we're going to talk about engines. So when I first started assembling this vehicle, I had a running 4-liter engine, 260,000 kilometers. And from what I knew, it was the original engine, and but it ran perfectly fine. But I was doing a complete rebuild, and the thought of putting in an old engine made me a little bit queasy. I'm going through all this work. It's going to be out. It's going to be easy time to change it. Now's the time. Now, a lot of people said, whoa, I would take a running Mopar engine over anything remanufactured on the market any day. Leave well enough alone. Other people said rebuild it locally, find a shop that you trust. And others said, there's a handful of remanufactured suppliers out there. So I did a lot of research. I decided I didn't really want to do it locally because everything's expensive in Calgary, and to find a machine shop that could do it, it would end up costing me as much as a reman engine. And just using my brain, my logic, I decided that things go out of tolerance. Things need to be balanced. Things need to be rehomed and precision measured. And that's what remanufacturing does. It's different than just saying, I'm going to put some new pistons in here and hone it out, right? They actually measure it all out and use computers, and they level everything. So there is actually a really good resource on rebuilding an engine yourself. Jeep Solid Garage did it. I highly recommend it, and I'll link it here. He convinced me that I don't want to do that myself. I don't have enough time to do that. So reman was really the way that I was going to go. So I looked at 3 manufacturers. The first was ATK Engines. For me, it was about a $3,000 Canadian project to get it shipped up here, and plus a $500 core, which then you had to send the core return back. ATK has horrible reviews. I emailed them, I called them, they didn't answer, they never emailed me back in 6 weeks. Reading all the horror stories about missing bolts and leaky engines and guys going through 2 or 3 engines to get one that worked. It's like, that's just too much for me. So I said no to them. Jasper Engines was the second one that came recommended. Everyone loves those, but they were about 5,000 US at least. And they're made in Phoenix, which is a long ways away. So I ruled them out just on cost. And then I stumbled on S&J Engines. They're out of Spokane. And S&J, I emailed them. The guy called me the next day. He talked me through their engines. He talked me through the process. They make 6,000 engines a year. They sounded pretty good. They also had a nice website where literally the owner of the business is going through showing you all the steps of remanufacturing an engine, what they do to test them and validate them, what they do to machine them, and then the final assembly and how they test them before they go out the door. They also come with a 7-year non-depreciating warranty. And so with all that and a price tag of just under 3,000 Canadian shipped to Montana, that was what I decided to do. And in the end, we ended up with a bit of a snafu on shipping. It ended up showing up late, and so I had to delay my trip, which was very unfortunate, and I was disappointed in them for that. But I got the engine, and so far it looks pretty good. So the next part is talking about what to do with all the parts that I wasn't going to replace. So a lot of them look like crap. I mean, they're 30 years old. A lot of the metal stuff is completely rusted. The plastic stuff needs to be refinished, reconditioned, just treated. So a lot of stuff was powder coated and first sandblasted. So I don't have a sandblaster myself. So some of the parts I sent with my Uncle Bernie, who has a sandblasting facility. And just to kind of an example of those, like there's the brake and gas pedal. Pardon me. This is the brake and the clutch assembly. This looked terrible before, and now it looks great. I can paint that. Another example here. Just one of the idlers from the engine, completely sandblasted. I can paint that now as well. Moving on to the powder coat. So I decided fairly early on in the project I was going to powder coat the entire frame. That meant getting everything off it, as you saw in the previous videos. And I took it into Calgary Powdercoating locally, because that was a shop that could actually do an entire frame. If you're not familiar with powder coating, it involves stripping with a sandblast, treating with a zinc primer, painting it with a special powdered paint, and then baking it in an oven at high temperatures. And that baking solidifies it so it's like a solid enamel, almost looks like a ceramic. So here you can take a look at the frame. In the end, the frame came out looking like new. I'd probably even say better than it looked new. Even in the places where I had to do some patching and some welding, they turned out great. There's one spot that the sandblast seems to have knocked a hole right through, and the powder coat even looks good on that. So overall, the frame turned out better than I could have possibly have hoped. I did another about 20-25 parts in the black powder coat as well, for an incremental cost of about $300 for all those. So it was really a no-brainer. If you're going to do a couple parts, you may do a lot of parts, because the incremental cost is not that high. However, you are limited based on color. So on the color side, I decided to do another batch of red as well. This was just kind of me going off the deep end. I could have stuck with black, but I wanted to give it a little bit more pizzazz, and specifically I wanted the valve color cover for the engine to be in red. So I figured, well, if I'm doing that in red, I may as well do the timing chain cover, I may as well do the oil pan, I may as well do the fan, and it just kind of went crazy from there. I'm doing steering knuckles. I'm doing hood supports, doing battery trays. If you haven't powder coated before, like you haven't lived, oh my god, this stuff looks amazing. So I'm now apparently building a show vehicle. So that was the powder coating. Anything else that didn't get powder coated or sandblasted, I had to wire wheel it, and that got really messy in here. But yeah, that's kind of what you got to do, and that's what I did with the axles, and got the axles all painted up really nice. So had to end up pulling the I guess it's called the spindles or the half shafts out. I'm not exactly sure, and then painting it all up, and we'll be able to put it together again soon. Did the same for the front axle as well, and it looks pretty sharp. It's not quite powder coat good, but it's pretty good. All right. Next, I'll talk about the wheels. So the wheels were actually something I did very early in the project. Right now it's March, early March, and I started I think in November with the wheels. I sent them up to Edmonton to the wheel clinic to get them done. And basically it was just some old wheels that I got with the Jeep. They're original, and he sandblasted them down and powder coated them a metallic red that you can see here. I didn't really expect the metallic, and neither did they, but it was a matching red to the rest of the vehicle, so I figured it would be okay. There's no resource that says you can't have metallic in your wheels, so we'll go with that and call it movie accurate. Tires, you can't get the exact Jurassic tires anymore. They're just not made anymore. They're not safe. But this is the closest thing to them, a BF Goodrich KO2, which is a really good tire anyway. Like, it's one of the best off-roading tires there is. So I got those made up along with the white wall lettering, which was quite critical, which they had to end up doing by hand. They apparently couldn't get them. So the wheel clinic did all that, shipped them back to my house, piece of cake. And they've been sitting in the corner trying to keep it from getting too dirty. So next I'll talk about the seats. So the seats were another project that I started really early. I just want to get them done and out of the way. I found a set of seats at, call it a wrecker, but it was more just a guy who liked YJs out by Armstrong, BC. And he had just a yard full of YJs and overgrown grass. And I called him up, and he happened to have a Sahara he was stripping out. And so I picked up 2 front seats and the rear seat. Now, they were pretty much destroyed, as you can see here in the pictures, but it would give Trim Pro here in Calgary a template on what to build for the new seats. So I took them into Trim Pro, dropped them off, left them for a couple weeks. He ended up finding the trail cloth green as well as the beige vinyl. They were very expensive, but he was able to finish up the seats. And as you can see here, the seats look absolutely spectacular. They came out better than I could have possibly imagined, but I had to pay for them. It was one of the most expensive things on the project at about $2,500. So, but they really turned out well. So that's the bulk of the new stuff that I've acquired in the past 3 or 4 months for this project. We're at the very basement here, the very absolute zero of the project, and we're going to start building it up. So when you come back to the next video, you're going to see some exciting stuff happening. One other thing I know people want to ask about is how much was spent on this project. As I mentioned, every time I pull off a part, I would look it up online and then create a spreadsheet using Google Sheets. And so I'll just show you just an overview here. I don't want to go into individual prices for individual components, but overall, I'm a little over $21,000 Canadian at this point. Again, given all the exchange rates and things, I've done all the work other than the powder coating and blasting myself, and obviously building the engine. And it's still at $21,000. So if you want to do this project, know that it's going to cost you a lot of money. That doesn't even include the purchase price of the Jeep, but it includes all my tools, all my parts, and all the labor that I've used to this point, as well as the labor I'm projecting to use to complete the project in the future. So including some of the paint bay rentals, the painting equipment, and so on. So there's not a whole lot left to spend on the project. I think I'm around $16,000 now, and it'll top out around $21,000, $22,000, and it'll probably be more than that, but for all the things that I haven't thought about yet. So that's where I'm at. Exciting times, changing gears here, moving into the second half of the project. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for staying a part of this. If Jurassic Jack was here, he'd say like and subscribe, and he'd slaughter some stuffed animal. Unfortunately, he's didn't want to come out in the cold today, but we'll get him for the next one. So thanks.